Well, leading mining companies have committed to development partnerships to enhance mining's contribution to development and poverty reduction around the world. CNBC Africa's Eleni Giokos caught up with Kobus van der Wath, MD of BEIJING AXIS, and he spoke about China's impact on the world. Let's take a look.
China is on a strong footing at the moment, and if we look ahead over the next 4 quarters and beyond into 2011, I think confidence will prevail. And indeed, China Inc. is going global. Africa is a very important strategic region for Beijing, and we're seeing companies across different sectors and industries, as well as then specifically in the mining and resources sector, across the different commodities, actively looking to pursue opportunities in the region. So I think that's going to be a very important trend for those that play in the region, in the sector, and has implications. For some it's a threat, for some it's an opportunity, and I think at the very least it deserves attention in boardrooms around the world in terms of China's going global agenda, but specifically for Africa.
Clearly, Africa and China have had a very good relationship for many years as well, but it is about securing of certain resources and, of course, agricultural land as well has also been a key focus for China. Let's look at the certain sectors. I mean, you said mining and, of course, manufacturing being one of them. What are the new projects that are in the pipeline?
Yes, well, I think the Chinese are looking across a whole spectrum of commodities. At this stage, iron ore, for example, is still a relatively unimportant commodity in an Africa context for China. If you look, for example, at Brazil, if you look at Australia. So I think we can see more interest in the ferrous space. If we look at manganese, for example, if you look at chromite, then those have long been important commodities for China, and there are certainly companies interested in those commodities and scouting missions all the time. But really across the spectrum, if you look at base metals, we know that large players like CNMC with the NFC Africa subsidiary is very active in the copper belt. I think those kinds of themes will prevail. But also then gold, I think there's significant interest. We've seen Chinese gold companies becoming global players in the full sense of the word. And of course platinum. So I think this is really an overall theme where there is a significant balance sheet to internationalize in China. There is a wide-ranging need for resources, and the mindset in boardrooms in China is very much to go out there, do deals, but it's also not easy. There are many challenges, language, the culture. It works from both sides, and there's, to some extent, frustration on the part of many Chinese that they're not completing the deals. So I think that is an opportunity for most to see how this long-term trend of China and Africa being integrated more closely, how that will unfold for benefits to those that are more proactive and have the foresight to position themselves well.
One of the criticisms has been, of course, that China goes into territories where most investors, most countries, fear to tread because of warlords and so forth. And there's also a lot of concern that China has relationships with certain countries and certain people in the countries that they shouldn't be having. I mean, what is your response to that? What's your experience been?
Well, I think, we have to see China as an important source of capital in Africa, and I think that must be the overarching consideration. But we must also ensure that corporate governance and governance more broadly is kind of a framework for activity to take place and when it then relates to local community interests, grassroots interests, when it relates to, for example, the environment, when it relates, for example, to safety, and really, areas like fraud and corruption, we need to make sure that these engagements take place within a sound framework. Now,
who overlooks that? It's kind of difficult when you're obviously saying that it needs to be in a regulated framework, and red tape needs to be adhered to. Of course, legislation in certain countries also needs to be adhered to. But who's really overlooking all of this?
Well, I don't think there is anyone or any institution that is doing that in an integrated manner, and perhaps that's part of the problem. Overall, though, I think that investors, and in this case we're talking about Chinese investors, are learning that there are certain overall international standards that are being enforced and that become universally accepted. I think the Chinese are no different. They also understand that, and that there are responsibilities, and that they need to look at stakeholder interests across the life of a project. But of course there are also those unfortunate incidents that get picked up by the media and that then get retold. But overall, I think it's the responsibility of people in transactions and in countries and in governments in the African continent to stand together and have a foreign investor view, and in this case a China view. And there must be an element of pushback, as I call it, to make sure that we enforce at least a framework on those that come in with capital, and that it makes sense, for both sides in a transaction.